traditional African garb before you this morning. So he's going to share with us a lot about what's going on over in Africa and what specifically you're in charge with as well. So thank you very much.
Good morning again, everybody. I think this is being live streamed, so I don't know if, is it working? Is the live stream working? Okay. Hello, everybody out there in YouTube land. Nice that you can join us. So let me first of all explain what you see on the screen there. One Africa team. So in the past, the WELS organized its world mission work according to country. So you had a Malawi mission, you had a Zambia mission, you had a Nigeria mission, and so on and so forth. That didn't always allow for good communication between fields, and that's kind of a problem, especially when you've got two countries which are next door neighbors, and they share a worker training program. So things that are decided in one country, very soon the news would get to the other country, and people would say, well, how come you're not doing the same thing for us? In addition, in the last just couple of years, opportunities are mushrooming across the entire continent of Africa in places where we've never had the opportunity to work before. That's why 5 years ago, the World Mission Board made a decision to restructure itself into one team. So every region, every geographical region of the world is now under the governance of a one team. So there's a one Latin America team, there's a one East Asia team, there was a one China team before the missionaries had to leave. Now we are the one Africa team. And what that means is all of the missionaries, regardless of which country they're working in, are together on one big mission committee. And we solve issues and discuss news and other items that are important together as a team. It's been very streamlining of things. It's helped us to push decision making down to the lowest level possible, which is really important when you think about how in the past you would wait for your administrative committee back in the United States to make a decision, and of course they're all busy pastors and teachers and lay people running their lives, and didn't always have a real clear view of how things were working on the ground. So that's the idea behind the One Africa team. So my name is John Rebke. I've been living with my wife Nancy over there in Malawi for the last 4.5 years. Prior to that, I served in stateside ministry for about 14 years. I was a pastor in both Alabama and South, and also in North in Wisconsin. I started out my ministry as a missionary in Eastern Europe for 10 years. That's where our two daughters were born as well. So I've had a chance to get around and see some different things in my world, and I hope that today I can give you just a little taste of what it's like doing mission work in Africa right now in 2022. But of course, where do we start this presentation? Well, what's been the big story for the last 2 years, right? COVID virus has impacted all of our lives. And, you know, I'm thinking in my mind, it's kind of like we're in another country now. There was the pre-COVID world, now we're living in the post-COVID world. And so many things are different in how we conduct ministry and how we just relate to each other as people. That's true for you here in America, that's true for us in Africa as well. It's like, you know, we were all going down the road at 100 miles an hour, headed towards our goal, and all of a sudden, God threw us a detour, or a diversion, as they call it, in Africa. So you've had to make a lot of adjustments to your way that you do ministry here. Did you have lockdowns here in Cambridge? Yep, okay. And so we had some things going on as well. So when you get on a detour, well, you know, in Africa, when they send you on a detour, it's usually, you know, a rutted road. Maybe there's some gravel, maybe not. and it's like a washboard, so you're driving really, really slow, and you're hoping that you'll get to the other side of the detour without getting stuck in the mud. I mean, that's pretty much how we've felt trying to manage our mission work for the last 2 years. We didn't really know exactly how things were going to turn out, and maybe you too were wondering, you know, where is this all going to lead? Lockdowns, you said you had those, mask mandates perhaps as well, limits on the number of people who could worship in your service. We didn't have any mask mandates per se. I mean, only if you were going into a shop, you have to wear a mask. If you're worshiping in church, they want us to have 50 people or less. But I would say in general, you've had much more extreme measures restrictions put on your behavior here in the United States than we had in Malawi. The average age of people in Malawi is 18, just because it's a huge population boom there. So the people are, in general, pretty healthy. They're walking around all day long, maybe up to 10 miles a day, working outside in the sun. People in Africa, I think they're a lot more worried about malaria than COVID. Just haven't had the same kind of death rates there that you've had here in the West. But still, it's impacted people's attendance. People are nervous. Attendance has gone down in a lot of worship. And of course, when attendance goes down, then the offerings go down as well. That causes another whole host of problems. Do you guys know about this program, Zoom? Maybe, we were actually using this one even before the pandemic. Because of our way our mission is structured now, we have pretty much weekly conference calls with missionaries all across the continent, as well as people living in the United States. It's been a really helpful tool for us as mission staff to be able to communicate with each other. It's also, to some extent, we've been able to leverage the internet to teach Africans remotely, not using Zoom, but using some other programs which are a little bit less well known perhaps here in America, but still gets the job done. So that means that I've spent a lot of my time for the last 2 years at my desk. Before COVID came, I was, happy as a clam, driving around on dirt roads in my pickup truck, visiting churches, bearing my truck up to the axles in mud, just having a good time, doing the kind of bush ministry stuff that you hear all the stories about. And after COVID, well, for 6 months I didn't even leave the capital city of Malawi. I just stayed there, I didn't go anywhere. So, I think you can all relate to that. We also know that the pandemic has brought out a lot of the stress fracture lines that existed in America before the pandemic came, in lots of things, not just Black Lives Matter, of course. In Africa, same thing happened. There was a stolen election in 2019, surprise. And so there was lots of protests that came out on the street. Lots of people used that as an opportunity to vandalize liquor stores, gas stations, to basically cause mayhem. And of course, the election was along the lines of the tribe, as I mentioned in my sermon. So you have people in the northern, in the central part of the country that were from one tribe and supported this candidate, and then people from the south that supported the other candidate. So, that's how things got worked out. Well, eventually what happened was the Supreme Court threw out the results from the previous election, and they did a rerun. And in the lead up to the rerun, the main two opposition candidates joined forces, so they were able to get the majority of the vote. So the guy who had claimed that he'd won is now under house arrest on the shores of Lake Malawi. The pandemic also, I think, has brought out the income inequalities that exist especially between Western countries developing and the developing world. Only about 8% of the people in Africa right now are vaccinated. We were able to get vaccinated before we left from Malawi, but it's a very small number. Part of that is not having access to the vaccines, part of it, because they depend on Western governments to donate these vaccines. I think part of it too is vaccine hesitancy. People are just afraid of what the stories that they read on the internet or that they hear. So overall, I think, going through this experience as a world, from the pre-COVID world to the post-COVID world, it's really exposed to us, or at least it should have, I guess, shown us how vulnerable we are. How you can't take anything for granted, how your whole life that you've built up and you've depended on, and your career, and you're on the path, could just be taken away from you like that. I was walking with a Malawian man on New Year's Day in 2020. He was in his early 60s, Malawian guy. He was the chief engineer for the hydroelectric dam, and 3 weeks later he was dead from COVID. Just like that. So your vulnerabilities are exposed definitely because of this pandemic. It's like when in Africa a big rainstorm comes and it knocks down your huge 8-foot-high wall fence that you have around your property to protect you from criminals, and all of a sudden you're exposed, right? That's really what I think COVID has done for everybody. So we're reluctant to reach out to people that we don't know. I mean, you're standing in line at a grocery store and you see somebody in front of you and they start sneezing or coughing. I mean, does it maybe make you feel like you really want to reach out to them and say, hey, how'd you like to come to Christ Lutheran in Cambridge? You know, it's like that's where we're at as a society today. We're reluctant to really venture out too far beyond our comfort zone. And where I live, you know, if you're the only American living on the block, you don't really want a lot of people to know that you're there because it makes you a target. And every time I walk out the front door of my house, people come up to me and ask for a job or ask for a handout. So, again, going through this pandemic, for all of you kind of have gotten a taste of what it's like to be living in another country, because we are living in a different world today than before 2020. And yet, in spite of all these challenges, in spite of all these restrictions on our behavior, on our own inhibitions that we experience as well, it's true that God is still doing amazing things in the world, and with us or even without us. Jesus was asked if he was the Messiah by the followers of John the Baptist. They were wondering because John the Baptist was sitting in prison, and it seemed like the forces of evil were gaining the upper hand. And what did Jesus tell John's disciples? He said, the good news of the kingdom of God is being preached, and everyone is forcing their way into it. So, in spite of all the bad things that have happened, in spite of all the roadblocks the devil has been putting in our way, we see that the gospel is still drawing people to Christ. It's still expanding his kingdom. And I hope in this presentation you're going to see some evidence of that, definitely in Africa. This is true. All right, so this slide is just to give you an idea of the size of the continent of Africa. When you look at a typical Mercator projection, the countries that are closest to the equator are small, and the ones that are closest to the poles are usually stretched out. But if you looked at it as a globe, as the size of what it really is, you can see that the continent of Africa is huge. I mean, you've got the United States, China, India, Eastern Europe, Italy, France, Spain, and Germany, and the UK, and Japan that can all fit within its borders. It's huge. And what makes it even bigger, I think, is when within each of the countries, the infrastructure is very poor. So in a country like Malawi, which is maybe the size of the state of Pennsylvania, it would take you days to drive from one end of the country to the other because of the poor condition of the roads. And then those are even roads which are paved. You get off the paved roads and you're on the dirt roads, yeah, you might be stuck there for a while before you get going again. Now, this is a map of all the mission opportunities that the Wells is pursuing in Africa. So you've got a couple countries in red. Those are existing partnerships that we have. These are independent church bodies with which our Wisconsin Synod is in doctrinal agreement. The blue countries are countries where we are pursuing new relationships. So just to kind of walk you through the existing partnerships on the west coast, or on the west, where Africa kind of makes that little corner there, I think that's the Bight of Benin. That is our oldest mission partner in Africa, Nigeria. So even before World War II, the Wisconsin Synod was supporting a missionary named Bill Schweppe, who was a Wisconsin Synod pastor and was working alongside of several Missouri Synod missionaries in West Africa, in Nigeria. And so that continued for a couple of decades, and then, of course, in 1961, the Wells and the Missouri Synod decided to separate from each other and end their official fellowship. So what happened about a decade after that is some of the Nigerian congregations who remained with the Missouri Synod decided they didn't like it, and they wanted to be partners directly with the Wisconsin Synod. And I think some of that was probably tribal, as most conflicts are in the world, not just in Africa. So there are two church bodies in Nigeria. They're independent of each other, but they're both in fellowship with the Wisconsin Synod. They operate a joint worker training program. and they have one man who is the teacher for that. It's a national pastor who's their professor. Cameroon, just across the border, so I don't know if any of you are old enough to remember the Biafran War at the end of the 1960s. There was the westernmost or the easternmost part of Nigeria. There was a tribe there that wanted to secede from Nigeria and form their own country, call it Biafra. Of course, the rest of Nigeria didn't go along with that, so there was a big civil war. A lot of those refugees ran across the border to Cameroon, and then, of course, some of those were Lutherans, and so they reached out to the Wisconsin Synod, and we eventually formed a partnership with that church body as well. So they also have a worker training program. They have a national pastor. They have two national pastors who are actually now on staff teaching. Again, no American missionaries live in either Nigeria or Cameroon because of the security concerns. Nigeria, there's lots of kidnapping, and Cameroon's in the middle of a civil war between the French-speaking part of the country and the English-speaking part. So we are able to get into the country occasionally and make visits, but not living there. Now, moving from West Africa to the southern part of Africa, I'll talk a little bit more about those two countries, Zambia and Malawi. So I'll just skip that over for now. And then over in the Horn of Africa, on the right hand side, in East Africa, you've got Ethiopia and Kenya, which are those are brand new partnerships. Well, brand new, but Ethiopia we accepted them as a partner in 2015, and I want to say Kenya was 2017. So anyway, I'll be talking more about those two partners later on. The blue countries, as you see, are countries where we have opportunities. People have reached out to us in a variety of ways, either through email or through personal contacts that they have in the States. And I won't have anywhere near the time to talk about all of those, but I'll talk about maybe one of them just to give you an idea of how we're going to handle this, because obviously these are huge distances that we're covering, and these are people scattered, and there's so many different countries that are reaching out to us. We really need to have some way that we can sort through all these prospects. We have like over 100 people on our prospect list right now. People have just reached out to us in one way or another. So trying to figure out how to work through that is going to be a huge challenge. So let me just talk about Central Africa. Let's talk about Malawi. I know this country probably better than any of the others because I lived there for the last 4.5 years. Just to talk briefly about the history of the country, it was a former colony of Great Britain. So English is the formal language there. Christian missionaries arrived back already in the 1870s, and then our Wells missionaries arrived in 1963, so almost 100 years after the first missionaries came. Now, when our missionaries arrived, most of the cities already had churches and Christian fellowships. So what we decided to do as a synod was to send missionaries where there were no churches. And those are, of course, the villages, the remote areas where you have to drive on bumpy dirt roads for hours and hours and hours to get there. That's where we went, literally to the ends of the earth. And so God has blessed the work in Malawi. We have over 30,000 members, at least some of the books that people that claim to be Lutherans in the LCCA, the Lutheran Church of Central Africa. Despite that, though, there are still a lot of unchristian ideas that are spooking around in the people's minds of Malawi. Superstition is a huge problem. So that boy in the upper left-hand corner, he's a boy who was born with the condition known as albinism, and that is it's a genetic mutation which is very rare. But when 99.9% of your population is black, you do see it quite often. And people who are born with this condition, the superstitious belief is that they are witches or that they have magical powers. So very often they're ostracized or even killed, and their body parts are harvested for use in magical potions. On the right-hand side of the screen, you have a man dressed up in the costume of Buli Wampu. So that's a secret society of people who function at major events in the life of the village. So if it's the acceptance of a new chief or the death of somebody important, these people put on the costumes and then they act out different morality plays. They're basically trying to teach the community to observe the traditional values of the culture. And they also make no bones about it. They are invoking their ancestral spirits to help them as they carry out these morality plays. So there's, a lot of that occultism in there. Lower left-hand corner, you see a title there, Malawi's Vampire Diaries. So this is a superstitious belief that when people die, sometimes it's because a vampire has drained their blood from them. This is kind of a bizarre thing that came across the border from neighboring country of Mozambique. But, it's a pretty serious thing. In 2018, 8 Malawians were killed by lynch mobs. They were accused of practicing witchcraft. The Peace Corps pulled all of its volunteers out of Malawi because they were afraid that they might be caught up in this. That it was just a real fear among the people. I mean, they even told us when you go into a village, make sure you don't show anybody your cell phone charging cord, because people think that that is what is used to drain blood from people. So and this all gets to the whole concept of Africans' traditional religion, their understanding of why bad things happen in the world. It always is a direct cause and effect. So if I happen to slip and fall on the ice as I'm going out to my car, it's because in the African's mind I did something to upset an ancestor. Maybe I didn't honor his memory by going to his grave on the anniversary of his death, so I'm being punished for that. Or it could be also because maybe my next door neighbor who was really envious of me cast a spell on me. And so now this is my bad luck. So again, if somebody dies suddenly without any warning, there's got to be some explanation for it, some direct one-to-one cause. Maybe it's a vampire, True story, we had some missionaries from Zambia coming to visit a church in Malawi. About an hour before they arrived, a young boy from the village had drowned in a lake. When the Zambia missionaries arrived, the local pastor told them to get out of there before nightfall. He was afraid that the local people would connect the drowning of the young boy and the arrival of these outsiders, and then somehow think that they were connected, and then come and take revenge on visitors. But these aren't just village superstitions. These ideas persist even in the cities. So that's a poster there somebody's promising their magical services for a fee to help you get some money or improve your love life or find something you've lost. In addition, there are lots of big-time preachers there who fill stadiums with people who claim that they have the power from God to heal all your problems and to make you rich and powerful. It's basically the Christianized version of the witch doctor. They call themselves apostles, right? That they are better than the average pastor. And like I said, people eat this up. Islam also has a presence in Malawi. It's small, maybe, 15% or so of the population. And you see mosques not only in big cities, but also even in the rural parts of the country. Primarily among the people of the Yao tribe. They kind of have a complicated history with the rest of Malawi. They were actually helping the Arabs to enslave everybody else back in the day when the Arabs were slave trading. So they don't really get along that well with the rest of their fellow Malawians. But in general, I wouldn't say there's open conflict or war between Muslims and Christians, at least not in Malawi. I mean, they seem to be able to exist peacefully. And I think the main reason is because they're both preaching the same message. It's basically a message of works righteousness. If you're good, you obey what God or Allah says, then good things are going to come your way. So we can all get on board with that. Poverty is a big issue. Malawi is like one of the poorest countries in the world. And so this poverty persists, of course, not just in the villages, but in the cities as well. Begging is a big problem. This slide shows you the relative cost of a plate of food. So we're just talking a very simple meal of beans and rice. This is organized according to your percentage of your daily income. So, it's a very small, how much does it cost us to have a bowl of rice and beans? It's like pennies, right? It doesn't cost us anything. But the farther down the scale you go, you see that in order for somebody to buy that, that's like a huge portion of their income. So what's Malawi? It's like almost half of their daily income would go to buying this if they bought it for themselves. So how do people survive in Malawi? Well, 80% of people live in the rural part of the country and grow their own crops. It's basically sustenance farming. You might have half an acre of land that they farm by hand, and they have big families, so the kids help them work up all the land. But that of course puts them at great risk of food insecurity whenever there's a drought, or if there's blight or some other pestilence like armyworms or locusts that come and consume the crops. And this is a problem, of course, not just in Malawi, but throughout much of Africa and the developing world. So in order to help with some of these people's economic needs, we've been able as a synod to do some humanitarian work, in addition to drilling wells to give people access to clean drinking water. We've also been able to have medical clinics that we operate in both Malawi and Zambia for the last 60 years. So in Malawi, these are really basic clinics. If you went there, you wouldn't even recognize it as a hospital. But it's just a simple brick structure with a place where a nurse can meet with patients and examine them and then prescribe some basic medicines. They test for malaria. They give a lot of prenatal consultancy to mothers as well as some postnatal care, weighing the babies, giving some vaccines. You may think it's not a big deal, but believe me, for these people it is huge. I went to one of the clinics and talked to a grandmother who had come from 10 miles away, basically riding on the back of her grandson's bicycle. And she just had terrible vertigo. She couldn't even stand up. So she basically had nowhere to go other than this clinic. I mean, they can't do anything major. They can't do any surgeries there. If there's somebody that's like in their life's in danger, they may put them in the back of their ambulance and drive them into the city. But yeah, I'd say the majority of the stuff that they do there in the rural areas is for malaria treatment, and then also for mothers who are expecting. And that's because the birth rate in Malawi, I mean, they've just had a high infant mortality rate for so many years. It has started to come down, so that's a blessing from God. Okay, I'm not sure if we're plugged into the audio or not here. This was a slide which was going to show you a Malawian church choir singing. Well, we can just push play and see what happens here. So, in spite of the hardships that people experience on a daily basis, people are relatively positive. They do look forward to going to church and singing God's praises. And it's a big social event. I mean, church can last up to 3 hours, easy. People aren't like looking at their watch saying, okay, I gotta get back to watch their game or whatever. It's a big thing. And the LCCA, as I mentioned, it's got 30,000 some members. It's the largest of WELL's partners. They're blessed with a ministry which is based on the gospel in the means of grace, not on the false teachings of men. So they have pastors who love to preach the gospel, pastors who have been trained well, and they're able to distinguish between law and gospel. Pastors who understand what it means to be shepherds, right? That the pastor isn't just somebody who, has a nice suit and gets paid money to entertain people on a Sunday, but actually somebody who cares about their people and visits them. Believe me, that is not a common understanding. Like, you understand what your pastor's job is. That's not a common understanding in Africa. Why are we still there? In other words, if they've done so many things, well, there are a couple of things where we still think WELLS can offer some assistance. I had mentioned about the infrastructure problems in the country, so this is when these churches were getting first planted, our missionaries would drive around in their pickup trucks, and they could, go through muddy roads or drive through riverbeds, whatever they had to do to serve churches. I mean, maybe a missionary would have as many as 20 congregations that he would serve. And there was like 25 missionary families living in Zambia and Malawi up until probably the late 1990s. And then as more Malawians and more Zambians were trained to take over the work, the number of missionaries was decreased. But of course, the Malawians, they don't have access to pickup trucks. They don't have the same kind of financial support that the Welsh missionaries did. So for them to ride this same circuit has been a challenge. There are some congregations in the far southern part of the country which were started by missionaries and which, we have turned over to the local church, but it's a struggle for them to get there more than once a quarter. I'll just tell you about one trip that we made. So I went with a group of pastors in my car to go visit one of the congregations in the south. We got as far as we could, about 2 hours by car, and then we had to stop because the bridge across the river had been washed out by floods. Then what we did is we got on the back of bicycle taxis and rode them to the shore of the river. Then we got onto like a big raft, and a guy with a big pole pushed us across the river. Thankfully we didn't see hippos or crocodiles that day. Got to the other side of the river, and then we jumped on the back of motorcycle taxis, so there was 3 of us per motorcycle, and we drove for about another 45 minutes to get to the church. So it was about a 4-hour trip one way. All right. So you can understand why there's challenges for the Malawi Synod to keep their congregations together. On any given Sunday, about 3/4 of the pulpits of the LCC are being served by lay people. They just don't have enough pastors to serve all of these congregations. So the lay people sometimes they'll read a sermon that their pastor has given them. We have books that have sermons written in them that they can use. It's just, who even knows what's going on? Nobody really knows for sure. Pastors struggle with using technology. I mean, we're all kind of, if you're older than 45 years old, we're all kind of struggling with that. But, definitely in Africa, they're even that far behind the 8 ball. So a lot of my time I've spent trying to educate people on how to use their phone, how to use their laptop. For a while, I was the editor for sermon books, so people would send me their sermons. They didn't email them to me. Maybe they would send it to me as a text on their phone, just type out the sermon. Or send it to me on a flash drive. Yeah, it's just challenging. Let's see what else we got here. All right, so another area where LCCA struggles is in the area of stewardship. So thankfully, all of the local pastors are paid by their congregations. Unfortunately, they aren't at the point where they can have one congregation support one pastor. So usually it's a parish union of 3 to 5 congregations, which all contribute towards the support of their pastor, which means that the pastor only gets to his congregation maybe once a month. They also struggle to fund things on a synodical level, so every year at harvest time they encourage their members to donate a portion of their harvest as an offering to the needs of the greater synod. And that's important because they've got a seminary to run, they've got other expenses if they're trying to have committee work or board of control or their synodical leaders. I think their total synod offering last year was under $2,000 for sure. So the school that we support is $80,000 per year to support it. So that school is the Lutheran Bible Institute that is located in Malawi, in Lilongwe. So students from both Malawi and Zambia attend this school. They have 20 slots available, and they go through a process. There's a vetting process that they have to get through, an interview process. Currently at the LBI, there's one American missionary, so that's Mark Panning, Tom Panning's cousin, who's teaching ancient history there, and then 3 other national pastors who are professors on staff. After they matriculate from the LBI, then they move across the border to Zambia, to the seminary, which is in Lusaka. And the Lusaka faculty is made up of 2 American missionaries. One of them is Ernst Wendland. He's been there since he's been around for a while. The other one, Phil Berner's been there for over 3 decades. Both of those men are set to retire in the next year and a half, so that's going to create some very interesting opportunities for us as One Africa team to talk with our brothers in Zambia about what's the best path forward for training pastors. They have 3 national pastors that are also on the staff that are working alongside of them. All right, I want to talk about East Africa now, Ethiopia. So Ethiopia, of course, is a country that has a long history, long association with Christianity. You know the story of Queen of Sheba who came to visit Solomon. The Africans, the Ethiopians claimed that she was one of their tribe and came back from her visit to Israel carrying Solomon's child in her womb, and then that son that she gave birth to founded their dynasty. You know, reality is probably not exactly that, even though there's a Queen of Sheba restaurant in Addis Ababa. The language that they speak in Ethiopia is a lot different than any of the other languages there in Eastern Africa. It's more like Hebrew than it is like a Bantu language. And that goes to the way that you do history, you study history in Africa has, there's no written records of, this king did this or this city was built there. So really the best way of figuring out, what the progression of history is by studying languages and seeing the relationship of one language to another. So you can say, oh yeah, these people have a language which is very similar to the people who speak this language over here, so they must have migrated at some time. The language that they speak in Ethiopia, it's very similar to Hebrew. It's a Semitic language. There was at one time a kingdom based in Yemen, which is on the southern tip of the Saudi Arabian Peninsula, and their kingdom stretched across both sides of the Red Sea. Were they African, were they Yemeni? Who knows? But that's the roots of Ethiopia. You also know the story of the Ethiopian eunuch, right? Here's a trick question for you. What country was the Ethiopian eunuch from?
Well, you would think it would be Ethiopia.
You would think, right? But it's not. No, he was from the country of Nubia, or which today is known as Sudan. So that's the southern. That's just to the south of Egypt. So the word Ethiops in Greek means burnt. So somebody who had a very dark color on their face. And Sudanese have the darkest skin of any in Africa, for sure. Anyway, that's probably where that name is from. Christianity officially came to Ethiopia in the 4th century from a missionary who came from what's today known as Lebanon. So the official Christian, well, I shouldn't say it's official, but the largest Christian church body in Ethiopia is the Eastern Orthodox, or the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. That picture on the right hand is a huge cathedral built to honor Haile Selassie, if you know that name. He was one of the last kings of Ethiopia. Actually, he was the last emperor of Ethiopia before he was overthrown by the communists in the 70s. There's also Lutherans in Ethiopia. There's a huge church body known as Makani Yesu. They are in fellowship with the Lutheran World Federation, which is also in fellowship with the ELCA. So some of the issues that plague them are like women pastors, inspiration of Scripture. The man that we're working with there, his name is Kebede. His full name is Kebede Igezu Gedechu, but we just call him Dr. Kebede because it's easier. He was brought up in the Makani Yesu church body, and then he went to America and studied at Concordia, St. Louis, and got his doctorate. And then after he left them, he decided he wanted to found a confessional Lutheran church separate from Makani Yesu. And so he formed the Lutheran Church of Ethiopia. And we have the privilege of being his partner. That building on the right-hand side, that's a building that we gave him the funds to build. That was a donation effort that was made amongst the members of the Wisconsin Synod a couple of years back. The Lutheran Church of Ethiopia has has 4 congregations and 1 pastor. They have 3 students in their seminary, but they also now have the opportunity to run a private school. The local government gave them permission to use some empty buildings for free, so they've got a school now with about 800 students in it. I think it starts in preschool and goes up to maybe 4th, 5th grade, something like that. And so that's a great blessing for them and a great opportunity for them to reach out to people in the community. It's also a challenge for them to find enough teachers and teach all these classes. Their seminary students are the ones teaching all the religious classes, so yeah, great blessing and challenge for them. Let's talk a little bit about Kenya. So my wife said to me that this community or this county has like the highest percentage of Swedish people, or Swedish ancestry people living
In Cambridge?
someplace. Yes, is that what the statistic was? I mean, there's lots of Swedish people there. I
Yeah, there is.
don't know how you tell. They have like a Swedish tattoo or Swedish people. Anyway, the Lutheran Church came to Kenya because of Swedish missionaries. The Swedish missionaries were actually based in Tanzania, which has a long history of Lutheranism in it. They came across the border in 1948 and brought the Lutheran Church to Kenya. And there's a lot of Lutherans in Kenya. And of course, as has happened in most of Protestantism, you have a lot of splits and factions. So you've got one branch of Lutheranism, you've got another branch. We're working with a branch that calls themselves Lutheran Congregations, it's LCMC, Lutheran Congregations Mission of Christ. So they formed in 2010, and they eventually came into contact with the Wells. In 2017, we declared a formal fellowship with them. So just a little bit about the people of Kenya. It's a very diverse country. It was a former colony of England or Great Britain as well. So when the colonial powers were drawing these country borders, they didn't really pay much attention to, what tribes and people live where. So a lot of these countries' problems are because they have people from different tribes living together that never really got along with each other. So in Kenya, you've got the Maasai people. On the left side of the picture, those are people who traditionally raised cattle, didn't really do much farming. They live in a very dry part of the country. And then you have urban congregations. The man on the right is serving the church, which is located on the ground floor of a 6-story apartment block. Most of his members are employed. They pay for their own rent. You've got some churches, some permanent structures, but like on the lower left-hand page, but most of the churches are more like the one in the upper right-hand corner, simple tin shacks with metal sheets and then a wood frame on the inside. One of the ways that Wells has tried to help them get permanent church building structures is by giving them money to complete churches that they've already started. So this may not look like much to you, but it's the beginning of a church that was built on land that was donated by a member of a church in western Kenya. We gave enough money for them to put the roof on. Here's another church in Ponge, very similar situation. We gave them the funds in order to be able to complete it. So we are really careful not to do things for people that they should be doing for themselves. It's just a simple matter of ownership. If you build, like if I give my daughter a brand new car as a graduation present, maybe she'll take care of it, but she might come to me and say, "Oh, Dad, it needs new tires," or "Oh, Dad, it needs an oil change," or that's kind of the thing that we don't want to have happen. We don't want to have people feel like now because the church was built by an outside agency, the outsiders have to take care of it for us. It's not a healthy situation. So that's why we've targeted congregations where they've shown some initiative, they've got something already on the ground that we can just give them a little bit more to help finish it to the point where the rain isn't going to fall on their heads during the rainy season. And it does rain like cats and dogs there, and then they can keep the sun off their heads as well. Well, so one of the jobs I get to do is I get to teach Greek to some students in Kenya. I've got 6 men that I'm working with, and we meet online once a week. There's a website that they can do some self-study of Greek, and then when we meet on the internet, I try to teach them some Greek using puppets and other kinds of object lessons. We try to teach this as a conversational language. So I don't know if you've ever studied a dead language before, like Latin, for example. The traditional classical way of studying a dead language is you get a grammar chart, you memorize the forms on the grammar chart, you write a test, and then you quickly flush that out of your mind, forget. That's not how you learn a language. You learn a language through repetition, through hearing it and speaking it. And most of my contacts there in Kenya, they speak at least 4 languages. In addition to English, which is the official language of the country, they speak their mother tongue and then maybe a couple of other tribal languages. So they're natural language learners. You just have to find the right way to teach them. And teaching in a conversational style seems to be working. It does take a lot longer, but I think over a longer period of time, you're going to retain more. I guess it just depends if they keep using it or not. I know that teaching Greek, I've learned my Greek. I've brushed off a lot of the rust. I think I finally mastered the third declension now, so that's something I can brag about. But anyway, puppets, that's a lot of fun working with them. They don't ask for much pay, you know. You just have to watch out for the one with the knife. All right, so now I'm going to transition from our existing partnerships to the new opportunities that we're pursuing. So you remember that slide I showed you with all those blue countries, right? There's lots and lots and lots of people to follow up with. We have to have some way of vetting these people or working through this list, because it's impossible for us to run down every single possible lead. So this is what we've developed in accordance with our Synod's Commission on Interchurch Relations. It's called the 4 stages. So actually the first stage is just a preliminary stage. It's a stage in which we introduce ourselves to each other. So we get a contact comes across the wells.net website. Somebody's got a church in Uganda, they're interested in working with us. So we'll send them an email and see where that goes. And a lot of times it doesn't go anywhere because people are just fishing, trying to get funding for their ministry in whatever way possible. But sometimes people respond. So then we start up an email correspondence. Maybe you make a few phone calls, and eventually, if it gets to a serious enough point, we'll schedule an in-person visit. Because there's only so much you can know about a church body, without actually ever having met anybody in person. So when we visit with these people in person, then we're very upfront with them, and we tell them, what it is that Wells wants to do, what Wells is interested in supporting. And that's important because, there's all kinds of ministries and all kinds of church bodies that are interested in doing things in Africa. And, some people are into building schools, some people are interested in building hospitals and funding people's pig farms or whatever. That's all great stuff, and God bless those people who want to do that. But that's not what Wells wants to do. What Wells Missions wants to do specifically is to plant churches which are going to be able to survive on their own and then plant other churches and multiply. There are some entities within the Wells that are interested in doing more humanitarian aid projects, and we are certainly willing to connect our partners with those people. But from the get-go, we want it to be clear that we prioritize the ministry, which is based on the Word, which is based on disciplining people, which is based on shepherding, which ultimately has the goal of strengthening up the congregations. So we present all of that as an initial meeting to talk, so that people have the right expectation. That's because we don't want them to have one thing in their heads and then we have something else, and it just, that one isn't going to go anywhere good. Then stage 1 is where we work to determine if we have a common understanding of what it means to be Lutheran. There's lots of people that call themselves Lutherans, but what does it mean? And the basis that we use for this stage is Luther's small catechism. So just like when you're confirming somebody, whether they're an 8th grader in confirmation class or an adult who's coming as an adult confirmand, go through the teachings of the Bible as we find them in the small catechism. We get to the end of that and we agree to continue. Then the next stage is really focusing on what does it mean to be a Lutheran minister? What does Lutheran worship service look like? Is it are they liturgical worship? Do they do a Pentecostal type worship with faith healing? That's a huge thing in Africa. Lots and lots of people are into the charismatic movement. So just trying to work through, what does Lutheran worship look like? How do you teach people to become members? Do you have a process by which you confirm them, or you go to church 3 times in a row and now you're a Lutheran member? But things that we shouldn't assume that we know the answers to. What is your teaching on stewardship? Do you let the gospel produce fruits of faith, or do you assign people a pew tax, or you threaten them? These are all things that we want to determine in stage 2. We also spend a little time talking about the teachings of Lutheranism as they're contained in the Augsburg Confession. And we start taking a look at their church constitution, if they have one. If they don't have one, we have a toolkit that we've designed to help people guide them through the process of figuring out what their church constitution is going to be. And that's important, right? I mean, you have a president, you have a bishop, you have a pope. Is this guy elected for life? Does he have a term that he serves? How is he elected? Is he just a backroom deal, or what? These are all things that we want to work out with them. Then stage 3 is, if we agree to proceed to this, stage 3 is the organizing of the formal meetings with the WELS representatives from the Commission on Interchurch Relations. So there's finally more documents that need to be prepared, and to set the table so that all the stakeholders can come to and meet and have discussions which we're all confident that we know what we're getting ourselves into. At the end of this, God willing, like it happened in Ethiopia and in Kenya, we declare fellowship with them. We recognize them as full partners of the WELS, and then we recommend them to our other partners with whom we're working around the world. There's the CELC, the conference, or it's the Conference of Evangelical Lutheran Churches. So that includes confessional Lutheran churches, which are in Europe, in Latin America, Japan, Asia, other parts of Asia, and then, of course, Africa as well. So I'm just going to give you one example of how this has been working, just kind of an illustration. So I mentioned I had been to Tanzania. That was back in November. This is a group of people who were originally part of the Lutheran Church, but then in 1993 broke off. They're all specifically from the Arusha, Meru area, so that's why where Kilimanjaro is. They left because they felt like their Lutheran church body was not giving them a fair shake. They also, all happened to belong to the same tribe, so, unfortunately. But anyway, they weren't able to work things out with their church body. So now they have their own thing that they call AMEC. It stands for Africa Mission Evangelism Church. They claim they're Lutheran, but not all of their pastors have a firm grip on Lutheran teachings or even Lutheran practices. But there are, the people who are in charge of the church body. There's an older man. His name's Bishop Kaya. He's their president or bishop, I suppose. He's a very committed Lutheran man, but he's also in his late 70s, and he knows his time on earth is limited. So he would like to be able to, encourage the rest of his people to come back into the confessional Lutheran fold. When they broke away in 1993, they didn't really pay too close attention about how they were going to, train future pastors. They didn't really think about that. So, of course, in the meantime, they grabbed pastors from wherever they could find them. Whether they were trained in a Pentecostal school or a Presbyterian school. So it's no surprise that they're kind of all over the place. We spent a week in Arusha meeting with the leadership of the AMEC church body. We took a week to go through this booklet on the upper left-hand screen, which is What the Bible and Lutherans Teach. It's a publication that WELS Multi-Language Productions has translated into about a dozen different languages, and it goes through some of the basic teachings of Scripture and the Catechism. There's a brief summary of each teaching and then some Bible passages. And we took about 2 hours to discuss each of those separate topics. And it was kind of like stump the pastor time, He's firing all kinds of questions at us. What do you think about this, or what does the Bible say about this? Thankfully, we had the president of the LCMC Kenya along with us. His name's Mark Lumunda. We had him along with us as a cultural guide and also as a translator. Most of the people in Tanzania do not speak English, so we were, that's another challenge. They speak Swahili, so working through a translator, of course, is challenging. I have to start working on my Swahili once I get back to Africa. We got to go to one of their worship services. They had some beautiful choirs perform. You can see the church building on the lower right-hand corner. It's a huge building. This is where the bishop's home congregation is. And they've got about 70 churches throughout the Arusha area. So it's a pretty good-sized church body. How will things play out in the future? Will we be able to continue to work with them? I mean, it's like they want to go fast. We want to just take our time. So these are things. This is just an example of where, of how this process works. So we're like in between stage 1 and stage 2 at this point with them. Now here's a completely different ministry that's generating contacts as well for us. It's the TEL network. So I don't know if you saw the Wells Connection back in December of last year. They featured the TEL network. It's an internet-based Bible school that's free. So anybody, anywhere in the world can go to that website, telnetwork.org, and log in and start taking classes. There's 3 self-led courses, so it's a total of maybe 22, 23 classes. You get to the end of that, if you want to continue your studies, then you can sign up for a class with a live instructor. And those classes are taught over the internet as well. So we've got 4 missionaries that are teaching students right now. 2 of them are based in the United States, 2 are based in Africa. And the majority of students who have responded to the TEL network are from Africa. So the Wells has decided to call another full-time missionary who will just do internet ministry. He's just going to do the TEL network. And they want to base them in Africa. So that you'll get a better idea of what African culture is like. Because there's so many things that you cannot learn about these people unless you actually rub shoulders with them. And just like I wouldn't really know much about life in Minnesota either. I mean, I listen to Prairie Home Companion. That's about all I know about Minnesota. So there's a lot more to Norwegian culture or Swedish culture than that, right? All right, just finishing up here. So we have a blog called the Wells Friends of Africa. It comes out like twice a month, just like a newsletter article, a picture, and some prayer requests. If you're interested in subscribing to that, you can go to oneafricateam.com. There's a link there. You can sign up, and then those updates will be emailed directly to your inbox. We also have a Facebook page. If any of you are on Facebook, just look for One Africa Team Wells. Wells Missions also has a Facebook page, so they give information not only about world missions, but also about home missions. If that's something that you're interested in, you can sign up for that. I don't know, did you get copies of this magazine or not? So you can take this home. This is a printed magazine. It's got lots of interesting pictures and mission stories from all around the world. And then finally, what can you do to help? Well, first of all, your prayers. Can't emphasize enough how important it is. The devil's really working hard to derail wherever God's kingdom is growing. It's definitely growing in Africa, so your prayers are needed because Satan is really hard working there. You could share what you've heard here today with maybe some of the people who weren't able to stick around for the service or for the presentation. Some of those didn't make it out today for whatever reason. You can discover more about what Wells is doing in Africa. As I mentioned, you've got our blog. There's also the wells.net, the Wells main website. There's a bunch of information there about each of the different fields that we're working in Africa. And then you can give, and thank you again for your support through your regular mission offerings that we give. This is part of the offerings we give to your church on Sunday, as well as the door offering. If you want to give directly to the Wells, you can just send it to the Synod headquarters. Just make sure you mark somewhere that this is for Africa projects so that it gets sent to the right fund. There's a survey link if anybody cares about that. Is there any other questions that you might have? That's all I have for today. Thanks. Questions? Yes.
We were working with the different groups, you said sometimes, but your main concern is, what you said about teaching the Bible. Like the Kingdom Workers, is that one of the ones?
Yeah, so Kingdom Workers is a Wells parasynodical, so they work alongside Wells. They have done work in Indonesia where we had missionaries. They've also done work in Malawi. They're looking at expanding into Kenya and Zambia, and their focus is primarily doing humanitarian aid tied to educational programs. So like they're going to fund a borehole so that there's clean drinking water. They also want to do some teaching about proper hygiene, how you wash your hands and sterilize and whatever. So that's what they're interested in. And, our primary work is to work with church leaders to help them manage their own church bodies and to provide whatever financial or teaching resources that we have to help them. Like for Ethiopia, he's got the seminary, but there's only one pastor. He's He's the president of the church body as well as the president of the seminary. Now he's got a big school he's got to run. So, you know, we were able to hook him up with visiting guest professors. Before COVID, they would actually fly from America and spend maybe 2 or 3 weeks teaching students in person. Now in the COVID era, it's more online. I taught a course on the formula of Concord for about a month to the students remotely, and that went pretty well. I'm scheduled to teach another course on the Offer Confession in May.
Is there others besides the kingdom workers?
Working in Africa, so there's the Christian Aid and Relief, which is, you know, they don't have a permanent presence, but they provide funding for natural disaster relief, so like there's a flood, buying some food for people. The medical mission, as I mentioned, they've got 2 Americans that actually live in Malawi, and they manage all of the medical mission work that's being done in Malawi and Zambia. They're going to be going back to the States probably, I don't know, June or July, and their hope is to turn things over to the local people to run it, and then he'll just manage it from abroad, from overseas. Maybe he'll make some trips, you know, to Malawi once in a while to check up on things. But
I got several questions.
yes, please.
So you said the water and the electricity get shut off
Yeah.
on a daily basis, and is it done by the government?
Yeah, so all the electricity, most electricity in Malawi is produced by a hydroelectric dam, which is located on the Shiri River. Unfortunately, that dam is broken. Actually, the generator's broken. They had a bunch of flooding, and you know, when it floods, you get all this logs and other garbage that comes into the turbines, so they shut everything down, and they're waiting for the floodwaters to go down so that they can clean out all the work. So that means that, you know, the country's only got about, it's only producing about half the amount of electricity that it needs. So you get what's known as a rolling blackout, or a load shed. So today I have power, tomorrow I don't. You know, everybody just kind of takes turns. But like I said, you know, most people in the village, they don't even use electricity because they
People
can't
do a lot
afford
of
it.
planning.
What's that?
People do a lot of planning.
Or they just, you know, yeah, missionaries, they might get up at 2 in the morning to do their laundry, but, you know, I've got a lady who washes my clothes by hand, so I,
You also said that pastors wear black gowns from the...
yeah, they wear black gowns, and then or they may wear just like a black shirt with a white collar.
But from the slides we saw, everybody was wearing white.
One of the pastors had black.
One,
One of them
yeah,
has black,
that was
yeah.
one.
I just, you know, those are the pictures that I had. They don't all wear black gowns, but, you know, but when they're like going around, you know, when they're not preaching, they're just, you know, going around, they do have the clerical collar that is been handy for us as missionaries to travel across international boundaries, you know. The border guards see the clerical, they recognize, okay, this guy is a church guy, and they don't give us as much grief as they would otherwise, so that's a helpful thing. Or if I'm ever doing anything with government business, I put the collar on, just to help smooth the path.
Yeah.
But otherwise, it's like, okay, how much money are you going to give me for a prize? You know, what trouble am I going to have here?
The other thing you said that Islam and Christianity coexist very well, peacefully,
Yeah.
they're based on works rather than,
Yeah.
you know. That's not what Islam teaches though. So their philosophy is to destroy Christianity ultimately. So there's not that thinking over there.
Yeah, I haven't really picked up on that. I think that is more true in a country like Nigeria or in Somalia. And those movements are tied also to tribalism and gaining political power. In general, though, you know, the people that live in Malawi, they're not interested in overthrowing the government. And it's because you have people who are either from this one tribe of Malawi, the Yao people, or you have, you know, a lot of people who immigrated from India back when the British were running the show. And they brought these people from, you know, Muslims from India before the separation from India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and all the Muslims and the Hindus were all living together before that. So a lot of those people came to Malawi. Now their second, third generation are living in the country. They're the merchant class. So they've got quite a bit of means at their disposal. Again, those people are not interested in overthrowing the country. You know, for them, probably it's just a matter of how they practice their religion. I got a neighbor named Mohammed. He's an airline pilot for Ethiopian Airways. Very intelligent man. used to teach at the private school, St. Andrews, which is in Blantyre. Now he's a pilot. He is trying to see if he can do, he just does basically the route from Malawi to Ethiopia, but he's trying to get into some other routes as well. He's a very secular guy. You know, he promised that he could bring me some liquor from a duty-free store in Johannesburg the next time he was there. You know, so he's not really practicing the tenets of Islam. But yeah, he's also. I had a conversation with him. It's like, well, you know, if you die, what would happen to you? You know, would you go to heaven or hell? And he said, don't ask me that question. You know, I don't want to think about that because you know it's just too frightening. He said, I hope that I'll be in heaven, but you know, Allah will say one way or the other. So that's what I mean.
He was Muslim then.
Yeah.
I wonder if they're different over here than over there. The Muslims, I mean.
There's all kinds of different Christians in the world too.
Yeah, right.
You know.
What about Christian persecution? I mean, from what we hear, there's always persecution, especially in Africa and China and all that.
Yeah. So that persecution, that's real in some parts of the world. It means in Somalia for sure, you do not want to go there. People will, I think in general in Africa, it's not as bad as it is like in the Middle East or in Indonesia. Those parts they're definitely, where there's a majority population of Muslims, it seems like there's much greater resistance to Christians. However, Wells is planning to call 2 missionaries to the country of Senegal, which is in West Africa. And Senegal is like 95% Muslim. Right, so they want to target a group of people who, as far as we know, nobody's ever brought the gospel to, or the whole of people. And right now, we have an open door to go there. Nobody is telling us you can't send Christian missionaries there. And as far as we can determine, Christians are not persecuted. Christian missionaries are not targeted. Now, if the local people start to convert to Christianity in huge numbers, that might change things on the ground.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions about Africa missions or?
It almost seems overwhelming,
Yeah, it is. I have enough slides here. I can go for 3 hours, but judging by the number of people in the pews getting slides. Pastor, is there anything else that you want to ask?
I'm very appreciative of you coming and sharing. I got a sleeping one right here. So.
I have that effect on a lot.
Hey, Paul did too.
All right, well, again, God's blessings to you.
We're pretty spoiled as Americans, don't you think?
Yeah, we're all spoiled. God, why does God just destroy this planet? He's merciful. That's why. God is merciful.
Resources.